You know when you're trying to follow a complex recipe or maybe assemble some IKEA furniture and one tiny mistake can just ruin the whole thing? Well, today we're cracking open an ancient rulebook that takes that idea to a whole other level. We're going to decode the incredibly precise laws that governed bird offerings on a sacred altar where every single detail, and I mean every detail, mattered.
Think about it like building a high-performance engine. You can have all the right parts, but if you put them together in the wrong order or in the wrong place, the engine's not going to start. It's a total failure. That's the exact kind of mindset we need here. We're talking about ancient rituals, where the physical action, the location, and even what the priest was thinking all had to line up perfectly.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start by looking at the two different offerings at the center of this. Then we'll walk through the three big rules: place, procedure, and intention. After that, we'll run some scenarios to see how these rules actually play out. And finally, we'll get to the big why any of this mattered so much.
Okay, so let's set the scene. At the heart of all this, you've got two very different rituals that both involved birds and both happened at the same altar. You have the bird sin offering and the bird burnt offering. They might sound similar, but believe me, they were operating in completely different spiritual lanes.
The bird sin offering was all about atonement, making things right after an unintentional mistake. The bird burnt offering, though, that was about pure devotion, just an expression of commitment. And because their purposes were so different, the rulebook for each was super specific. You could not just swap one for the other. No way. And that brings us to the first, most basic rule of the game: geography. Seriously, where on the altar this all went down was the very first test. Location is everything. See, the altar wasn't just a big flat surface. It was actually divided by a physical red line right across the middle. This created two distinct zones, an above zone and a below zone. And this wasn't just for decoration. It was a critical boundary that determined whether an offering was even valid from the get-go. And the rule was simple and absolutely rigid. As you can see, the sin offering had to be performed below the red line. The burnt offering, on the other hand, belonged above it. Get this one detail wrong, and that's it. It's an immediate disqualification. Didn't matter how perfectly you did everything else. If you were in the wrong zone, it was game over. So let's say you're in the right place. Great. But now comes rule number 2, the physical act itself. The procedure, the actual thing the priest did with his hands, had to perfectly match the offering being made.
And the level of detail here is just incredible. The sin offering required this very specific pinching action at the nape of the bird's neck, done with a fingernail. The burnt offering, it had its own totally separate procedure. These weren't just suggestions. The physical action itself was part of the offering's core identity. You couldn't mix and match.
Okay, so we've got the right place and the right action. But there's one more layer to this, and honestly, it's the most fascinating one. It's all about the priest's intention. What was going on inside his head was just as important as what he was doing with his hands. Right. So the priest couldn't just be on autopilot, going through the motions. His mind had to be locked in, focused on the specific purpose of that offering. He had to be actively thinking, I'm doing this for the sake of a sin offering, or this is for a burnt offering. His thoughts and his actions had to be perfectly in sync. Okay, so we've got our 3 big rules: place, procedure, and intention. Now, let's put them to the test. We're going to run through a few scenarios to see exactly how these 3 variables interact to make an offering valid or totally invalid. First up, the bird sin offering. Quick reminder, its home base is below the red line, and the procedure is that very specific pinching action. Let's see how it plays out.
This table really shows just how strict this system was. For a sin offering to count, everything had to be perfect. Right place, right procedure, right intention. That's a valid offering. But look what happens if even one thing is off. If the priest has the wrong intention, maybe he's thinking about a burnt offering, boom, invalid. If he uses the wrong procedure, invalid. And if he's in the wrong place, above the line instead of below, game over. Nothing else even matters at that point. All right, let's flip over to the bird burnt offering. Its spot is above the red line, and it has its own unique procedure. And this is where we find a really cool little nuance. Okay, check out that second row, because this is wild. If the priest is in the right place, using the right procedure for a burnt offering, but he has the wrong intention in his head, the offering is still technically considered valid, but, and this is a huge but, it doesn't fulfill its purpose. The person who brought the offering, their obligation isn't met. So the ritual physically happened, but it spiritually fizzled. Meanwhile, just like before, get the procedure or the place wrong, and it's completely invalid.
So after going through all those rules and scenarios, the big question that's just hanging in the air is why? Why this intense, almost obsessive focus on every last detail?
And the answer is actually pretty deep. These weren't just random, arbitrary rules somebody made up. They were all pieces of a system that demanded a complete and total synthesis of action and thought. For a ritual to have any real meaning, the physical world and the mental world had to be in perfect harmony.
This quote really just says it all, doesn't it? It wasn't enough to just go through the motions. You couldn't just do the right thing in the right spot. It had to be done for the right reason. The physical and the mental, the action and the intention were completely tied together. If one was off, the whole thing was meaningless.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. You know, we live in a world that's all about multitasking and speed, where we're doing one thing while thinking about 10 others. So what can we learn from a system like this? A system that demanded such singular, focused intention. A system that believed for an action to be truly meaningful, it requires all of us, our complete, undivided presence. It's definitely something to think about.